Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. A quick note to our listeners, this is the first program we're sharing since October 7th, when Hamas terrorists murdered over 1,400 Israelis and kidnapped more than 240 others. As Israel continues to defend itself, our hearts are with our brothers and sisters in Israel and with Jewish communities around the world. We're faced with unfathomable spikes in anti-Semitism. Now, if you like this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. 1 month after Israel suffered the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, where does the fight against Hamas stand, both on the ground and online? Joining me for a special wartime episode of the B'nai B'rith podcast is former Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom and current senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel, Mark Regev. Ambassador Regev will address the increasing calls for pauses and a ceasefire in Israel's defensive war, the global spike in anti-Semitism and lack of empathy for Israelis and Jews since October 7th, and the media's near abandonment of fair and objective reporting. Ambassador Mark Regev is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's senior advisor for foreign affairs and international communications. Prior to this appointment, he served as Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom from 2016 to 2020, and as the Prime Minister's advisor and international spokesman from 2007 to 2016, during which he became one of Israel's most prominent voices in the English-speaking world. Mark, thank you for being with us under these difficult circumstances. We hope you're staying safe and appreciate your giving us some of your time. Mark, first, give us a sense of where you see Israel's fight against Hamas from your perspective. We'll get to the social media battlefield in a bit, but I'd like you to share your analysis of the war 1 month on.
Well, you're right in the use of your word war, because this is something very, very new in our relationship with fighting Hamas in Gaza, because as you know, there have been a number of rounds of fighting since Hamas took over 16 years ago. But this is not another round where Israel was trying to achieve deterrence, trying to achieve a period of quiet. Because of the attack on October 7th, Israeli policy has changed, and that needs to be understood. This is war. The first time we've called it war, and this is the goal is to destroy Hamas, to dismantle their military machine, and to end their political control of the Gaza Strip. And so we're in a different conflict that we have been in the past. That has to be understood. It means the conflict will be longer. It will require a commitment, an effort, a resolve to see this through. And people have to understand this is not another round of fighting between Israel and Gaza. This is war, and we have no choice but to be victorious. It's not a war that we wanted. It's not a war that we initiated, but after receiving the sort of attack that we had to endure on October 7th, I think the idea that we should continue living next to this Hamas enclave is just, it's not a position that Israelis can accept any longer. And this has to end with a new reality in Gaza. And that new reality is there is no longer Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip. They no longer have the capabilities to inflict the sort of damage and brutality and murder that they did on October 7th.
We've been following public opinion and watching it for many, many years. Much of the world, after the first couple of days, turned quickly from sympathy or empathy for Israel into condemnation of Israel. Why do you think this is, and how can burning families alive and beheading babies and taking hostages not have ongoing sympathy and concern from all civil-minded people?
So you're 100% correct. This time I'm glad to tell you that the nature of the atrocities that Hamas committed against our people were so horrific that we saw world leaders, not just the American president, but we saw prime ministers and chancellors, leaders from across Europe, all coming to Israel to express solidarity and support for Israel, and more importantly, endorsing our goal that Hamas needed to be destroyed. That's very, very important. But you're right. People say they have short memories, and today the photographs coming out of the Gaza Strip are primarily of destruction there, and then there's a natural reaction, and we've been there before, blame Israel. But I think, and I see it by watching the coverage, the shock and the horror at what Hamas committed on October 7th is still there. It's our job to remind people why we're fighting, and to remind people who Hamas is. Because there is no peace with Hamas. There is no coexistence with Hamas. Hamas showed itself on October 7th. I mean, the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, called them Nazis. He made the comparison. These are not people that you can live with in peace. And anyone who, let's say, says we have to have a ceasefire or something like that, what are they basically saying, Dan? They're saying, give Hamas time to regroup, to rearm, and they'll commit another October 7th, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 1 year from now. In fact, the deputy leader of Hamas said that publicly. They said, given the opportunity, they would inflict the same sort of attack again and again and again. And the people of Israel have decided, no, we won't live in that reality any longer. And, you know, we're taking casualties in battle. We will continue to take casualties in battle. Some of our best and you know, the best and the brightest of our young men are fighting on the battlefield, and some of them are not going to be returning home. Every day the casualty numbers go up. But I think there's an understanding in this country that this is a job that must be done, that we have to change the status quo in the south. We have to end Hamas's rule.
Let's talk about social media, the content on social media, especially X, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. These platforms have once again become a window through which the world is viewing a war, and where violence and tragedy are sadly unavoidable. Misinformation, conspiracy theories aimed at smearing and delegitimizing Israel are rampant. And this is the first time that artificial intelligence perhaps has played a role too. Give us your thought about the online war against these anti-Israel forces around the globe, and what messages might you share to begin changing hearts and minds?
So it's not easy, and I can't tell you I've got all the answers. I read a piece earlier this week in the New York Times where they talked about efforts by governments to deliberately manipulate social media. And they were talking about the Iranian government, the Russian government, and so forth. This is a problem, and we are fighting back on social media, both as a government and many non-government Israelis, different institutions, academic institutions, others, fighting back against the hatred, the anti-Semitism, and the disinformation online. But it's difficult, and it's not easy. And what I think we have to do when we're on social media, we have to remember three things. One, we want to put out messages that the people who know that Israel is right have the facts. In other words, we have to give the ammunition for Israel's friends abroad so they know why Israel's fighting, what we're doing, and to counter the lies. Number two, we have to watch what our enemies are doing on social media, because they are exposing themselves for what they are. I mean, sometimes they'll try to have some sort of, censored slogan, we want a ceasefire and so forth. But actually, if you actually follow them closely, they are hate groups. And they closet anti-Semites, and we have to watch them and expose them for what they are. And finally, there are those people in the middle who maybe are interested in being persuaded. Our arguments are strong. Our arguments are just. We have to persuade the people who are persuadable.
Mark, you've been a diplomat in a very important diplomatic post, so you know the diplomatic world. There was a vote at the UN a couple of weeks ago in the General Assembly, which was adopted 120 to 14 with 45 abstentions. This was calling for a ceasefire. Hamas was not even mentioned in this resolution. In Europe, only 4 countries, Austria, Croatia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, actually voted against this resolution. There were a couple of countries also in Latin America and the Pacific Islands how do you explain, after knowing all that we know about what happened on October 7th, the glimpse basically into the past, the glimpse into what the Holocaust actually was on those few hours, those several hours on October 7th? How do you explain that countries in Europe would choose either to abstain or even vote for this resolution?
So, unfortunately, the UN General Assembly routinely passes anti-Israel resolutions with massive majorities. And that's unfortunately the reality. That's the status quo at the UN. And even when, in a case like this, where you have the most egregious, as you said, anti-Semitic act of violence, the largest act of anti-Semitic violence since 1945, in proportional terms, the largest terrorist attack in modern history. In proportional terms, if you look at, there's only 9.5 million Israelis and the number of people killed, it's 20 9/11s in proportionate terms. And so you say, even in those circumstances, the UN General Assembly couldn't condemn Hamas. It shows you there's something very wrong at the United Nations. That's the basic thing you can say. What we can, and if you want to, Dan, look at the positive side. We lost at the UN, but in parallel, we've had the President of the United States here. We've had the Prime Minister of Great Britain. We've had the President of France. We've had the Chancellors of Germany and Austria. We had the Prime Ministers of Bulgaria and the Czech Republic and Romania and Italy, and the list goes on and on and on. So there's always this distance between what's going on in the real world and at the United Nations. It doesn't mean I'm not worried about what's going on in the United Nations. And as you know, Israel has been particularly critical of the United Nations Secretariat and the Secretary General. Some of his comments were unacceptable. And I hope he learns his lesson. There were two consecutive Secretary Generals of the United Nations, Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon, who both publicly admitted and talked about institutional anti-Israel bias at the United Nations. They admitted that it was there, and they admitted it was a problem. Unfortunately, the current head of the UN, instead of tackling anti-Israel bias at the United Nations, he appears to be embracing it, and that's a problem.
Mark, final question. We're seeing a global rise, hundreds-fold, in anti-Semitism. What do you say about people protesting in the street with chants of glory to the martyrs, from the river to the sea, many of whom probably don't understand exactly where Israel is or where Gaza is, though they may be the rants of mindless, manipulated young people, and I feel that is the case. There's a lot of organization behind this. There's probably a lot of money behind these mass demonstrations. Social media is surely a negative force multiplier in advancing anti-Semitism. What do you say about this rise in anti-Semitism, and what observations do you have in terms of what we should be doing to turn that back?
So the first thing that has to be said and needs to be said is Hamas is an anti-Semitic organization. People know it's a terrorist organization. People don't, people don't know it's an anti-Semitic organization. If you read the Hamas charter, it is full, awash with conspiracy theories about Jews, about tropes about Jews, about Jews controlling the world and Jews causing wars and Jews profiting from those wars. It's a lot of it's just out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and that's Hamas. That Hamas's supporters around the world embrace that sort of anti-Semitic worldview. We shouldn't be surprised that anti-Semitic worldview has gone outside Hamas's core support and has affected other parts of the anti-Israel movement. I'm sure that's 100% correct. I remember when I lived in Britain, there was, Israel's enemies always denied being anti-Semitic. They would often point to one or two Jews who support their positions, yes, but in the end, I think they can't conceal it. And for anyone to be apologist for Hamas, for anyone to try to justify what Hamas did on October 7th, for anyone who says that Israel shouldn't and doesn't have the right to defend itself and protect its people, that has to be based on anti-Semitism.
Ambassador Mark Regev, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us, and especially for all you do for the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
Thanks for having me, sir. I thank you and everyone at Bnei Brit International and the organization, your your institutions around the world. You are appreciated. We know, especially in tough times, your friendship and your work is greatly, greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you again to my guest, Mark Regev, former ambassador and current senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for speaking with us, and to you for listening to our show. We hope you liked what you've heard. If you did, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and leave us a rating. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. We also ask that you consider donating to our Israel Emergency Fund and stand with us unwaveringly in support of Israel during this time of great need. Find out more at b'naibrith.org/Israel at War. This is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Until next time, take care, everyone.